Oh, and there goes the otter.
Hi everyone, and welcome to this month's Wildlife Wednesday monthly roundup. I'm your host, Tenley Thompson.
And I'm Tyler Greenlee.
And we have a ton of amazing wildlife videos to show you this month. Let's go ahead and start out with our very own Tyler Greenlee with a great wolf update from Yellowstone National Park.
Woohoo. Hi everyone. We just got back from our winter wolf multi-day tour in Yellowstone National Park. During this tour, we had many wolf encounters. We saw several individuals and multiple packs. However, one of our encounters stands out above all the others. We were able to witness wolves hunting bison. It all started when one of our guests spotted wolves when we were looking at bison in Yellowstone National Park. Here you can see the large group of wolves harassing and chasing the bison off in the distance. Now, what these wolves are trying to do is they're trying to separate a member of the herd, typically a smaller member, either a calf or a female, that would be easier for them to take down. And here you can see they do just that. They end up separating two calves from the herd, and they end up going after the calf on the left, and they chase it, nipping at its heels all the way to another herd of bison where it seeks sanctuary. And you can see once that calf is in the herd, the members will actually chase the wolves away and defend it. Now, after a while, this calf, which is seeking sanctuary in this herd, realized that it wasn't with its mother, and calves and cows, they really don't like to be separated. That instinct to stay together is very strong. And so you can see here that this calf actually once again leaves the safety of the herd to try and rejoin its mother and the other group of bison. It's almost like sharks and minnows. And here you can see the bison puts on an impressive burst of speed and makes it all the way back to the main herd. What's really interesting about this encounter is that over time, as elk numbers have decreased on the northern range and bison numbers have increased, wolves have selectively decided to go after more and more bison. They are choosing them as a prey item. And this is leading to interesting behavior, which we have been able to see on tour. As herbivore populations continue to change in Yellowstone National Park, the wolf's diet changes to reflect that abundance of prey. This means that we are constantly seeing new behaviors in this dynamic system, and it makes our winter wolf multi-day tours my favorite tour and super interesting to join in on. Well, thank you everyone. My name is Tyler Greenlee, and thanks for tuning in to Wildlife Wednesday. Awesome. It was really amazing to see those wolves actually chase that young bison from herd to herd. It was almost like a game of shark and minnows. You might have heard that comment in the actual video, but it was really cool. It was almost like a game or a dance between predator and prey. Now, usually in the winter, we only see wolves as our large carnivores. Usually our bears are not visible, and we usually don't see mountain lions very often. However, this winter we've had the opportunity to see a hibernating bear. And before we show you that video, we have Laura to talk about bear hibernation with you.
Hi everyone, this is Laura. This time of the year, in the middle of the winter, we all want to imagine our local bears snuggled into their dens, all happy, safe, and warm until spring. In the spring, when they come out of their torpid state, they're going to be just as strong as when they went into their den in the fall or early winter. Although they've lost some fat reserves over the winter, they do not lose any of their muscle mass. And to me, that's quite amazing. Bears are able to recycle proteins within their body and also waste products in their body, which are processed during their torpid state. Let me explain. To me, wild animals have evolved with traits that make them able to perform like superheroes. If you were a superhero, what trait would you want to have and why? Would you want to have long claws to be able to take down big prey? Would you want wings to be able to fly? Would you want to be able to swim to the bottom of the Pacific Ocean and survive there in the dark? Or maybe you want to live in a really dry place like the Sahara Desert. For bears, their superhero trait is that they're able to sleep or go into a state of torpor or light hibernation for months at a time. And when they get out of bed, they're just as strong as when they went into their den in the fall. For humans, if we could adapt that behavior or adapt the ability to recycle nutrients within our body, we might be able to go to a different planet. We might be able to travel to Mars. We might be able to stay in a coma for a long amount of time. We might even be able to fix ailments like kidney diseases that afflict many people. When our bodies, or the bear's body, is functioning normally, we create a waste product called urea. Urea is created in the liver when we break down proteins or amino acids, and then it's transferred into the bloodstream, where the kidneys will filter out that urea into the bladder, and then we pee it out. But sometimes, like in the case of a bear that's in hibernation, they're not excreting anything. They're not going to the bathroom throughout the winter. Also, if a human has a problem with his or her kidney, then that could mean excess waste products or excess urea and nitrogen could build up in the bloodstream, which will make you pretty sick. So bears have developed this system to be able to recycle urea within their body and turn it into useful material, including protein, to reuse it during hibernation. This gets kind of complicated, but please bear with me. This is pretty interesting. When bears are in their dens, we assume that they're just sleeping, but in reality, their bodies are performing complex conversions to convert waste products into proteins that they can use. And don't worry, at the end of all of this, it will result in bear farts. So, of course, we're starting out with that urea stuff. It's produced by the liver, which goes into the bloodstream. Normally, the urea would then pass into the kidneys, which filters out the urea into the urine, and then that's what makes the yellow snow. But in this case, a bear's not going to the bathroom because he's in his den. So the urea passes into the saliva instead. And then that saliva is swallowed by a sleeping bear, which enters the intestines, which house special bacteria. And the bacteria help to break the urea down into bicarbonate and ammonia. Ammonia gets transferred into protein. And the bicarbonate, which is more like a waste product, gets broken down by acid created by the bacteria, which is then separated into carbon dioxide and water. Water helps to keep the bear from getting dehydrated, gets reabsorbed into the bear's system, whereas the carbon dioxide gets farted out as bear flatulence in the den. I'm assuming that bear dens are very stinky places. So we can add this metabolic conversion to the superhero traits that bears possess. Other cool things that they can do are climb trees. They can dig their own dens. A bear can do about 50 yards in 3 seconds. They mate in the springtime and then give birth to their cubs in February. And if you scroll back, check out some of our other episodes, I'll explain that too. But thank you for watching. If you have a superhero trait that you'd like me to know about, please mention it in the comments. And I'll see you next time.
Thank you, Laura, so much for sharing all that great information about bear hibernation. When We were on our multi-day trip up in Yellowstone. Just last week, we actually got to see a hibernating bear. And Sarah Ernst caught some really great footage and actually sped it up for us so that we can see this bear breathing while she's in hibernation. And I'm gonna talk a little bit about this bear while we show you the video. So here we go. So this is a female American black bear with 2 cubs that is currently hibernating up in Yellowstone. And if you look closely, you can see her actually breathing. She's breathing, every couple of seconds or so. This video is sped up by about, I think, 10 times the normal speed. She's only breathing about once or twice per minute. Great, I hope you all were able to catch her breathing. Maybe after the broadcast, you can rewind if you missed it. But really great footage and really cool to see a bear in hibernation. And apparently she did come out of that den a couple weeks ago and was moving around. Hibernation is not a constant state that these animals are in. They go through cycles, and sometimes bears do wake up and stretch and come out of their den before they go back in and resume hibernation. But bears are not the only animal that modify their behavior in Yellowstone for the winter. Elk also modify their behavior, and we threw together a video on elk survival in the winter. Elk are very well adapted for surviving in a wintry landscape. They have incredibly thick fur and thick skin, and their long legs keep them up above the cold snow and ground layer. Now, one of the most important aspects for their winter survival out here is a consistent supply of food. And oftentimes we'll see elk, like these cows here, gather up on barren hillsides where the wind has maybe swept away the snow or the sun has melted the snow away. And there the elk can feed on those open patches where the vegetation is exposed. Now, not every single habitat that the elk live in is going to have patches of open vegetation, and they're going to have to dig through the snow, just like this bull elk is doing here, to reach the grass and vegetation beneath the snow layer. Now, that means that elk have to migrate, oftentimes hundreds of miles. Now, migration takes a huge amount of energy expenditure, and it really only occurs in landscapes where you have a varying amount of elevation and habitat. Now, unfortunately, because of the rigors of migration and the rigors of just living in a harsh wintry landscape, some of the elk out here inevitably die. But their bodies provide a really valuable food source for a variety of scavengers and carnivores out here. Eagles, ravens, and magpies pictured here, and a variety of mammals such as foxes and coyotes all depend on elk as a winter food source. Without these carcasses to scavenge upon, these carnivores and scavengers would have to travel hundreds of miles in order to find enough food on their own to survive. Some of the elk that succumb the most to the winter are actually the bull elk. Here's a nice male with some big antlers. The reason that these males are oftentimes the one to die during winter is because they spend a lot of energy during the mating season courting females and chasing them around. That means by the time February and March rolls around, they tend to be the weakest members in the herd.
Awesome. So pretty interesting stuff when it comes to elk survival strategies. I think that's mostly what we've got for videos this week, but stay tuned. Coming up next, we've got our trivia question of the month for your chance to win. And of course, our Ask a Naturalist segment. Tyler and I will be here to answer any questions that you may have about the natural world, the Great Yellowstone ecosystem, traveling here, Jackson Hole, nature in your own backyard. Definitely no question is too big or small for us. Definitely questions from all ages are always appreciated too. So if you've got any kiddos hanging around who've got questions, we'd be glad to hear them. Just put them right on in the comment section. And Kelsey, who is moderating the comment section this month for us, will certainly help us see them. In the meantime, it is time for my second favorite part of the segment, which is our trivia question of the month. Now, our trivia question of the month is, of course, sponsored by the EcoTour Adventures web store. We started this store originally in 2020 right around now, right in March, right in the beginning of the pandemic, as a way to help support our EcoTour Adventures office staff and guides and support them. So anything you buy from our web store, 100% of the proceeds go back to the guides who you've seen make these videos today. Certainly a lot of things of interest, but our featured item of the month is our Stio brand wear with those great EcoTour logos on there. Stio is a local, well-renowned clothing company here in Jackson Hole, and they're the ones who make our uniforms. I think you've seen quite a bit of it before. Yeah, when you see all the guides in these jackets and other great Stio gear, you can own it too. Go ahead. Kelsey will put a link in our comment section if you want to investigate that. There's plenty more on the web store beyond just Stio gear. Lots of amazing books that we talk a lot about on tour. Some of our favorite local artisans and Jackson Hole and Yellowstone related art and gifts and all sorts of cool stuff. So definitely feel free to check that out. In addition, if you want to leave a tip just directly to the guides, you don't want to buy a winter hat or a, Death in Yellowstone book, but you do want to support one of the guys who created one of the videos today, we are more than happy to provide this free of charge to you all. It's just something we enjoy doing and we really love to do. But anything you want to do to directly support the guides who took some of this footage for you, you're welcome to contribute in that Donations for Guides page there in the web store. All right, enough of that. Let's talk trivia. We've got our trivia question from last month, which as everybody remembers, might have been a little bit of stumper. There was a two-part to this. Definitely was a tricky one. So we'll go ahead and we'll answer that one first. And then you guys have a chance to win with the new trivia. So anyone who answers correctly in the comment section on the new trivia question of the month will get a gift card to the EcoTour Adventure store to go ahead and buy maybe one of those cool products you just saw, but only on the new trivia. So let's do the old trivia question from February 1st. What winter adaptations do plants have in order to survive the winter? Do they grow close to the ground? Do they wait for tourists to knock snow off their branches? Do they hibernate? Do they have roots that can utilize water from snow or nothing? All right, what do you guys think? Go ahead and tell us in the comments that you want. You won't win if you do that, but you definitely can give us your opinion. Everybody got their guess? All right, the answer is...
The answer is grow close to the ground or in shapes that shed snow more easily. Yeah, so in a lot of high alpine areas, you'll often see trees that are kind of growing almost to the side. They're shaped often by the wind, but they also have that shape so that snow falls off of their branches more easily. Plants, we often think of animals with winter adaptations, but plants have to survive out here also. And this goes down even to the cellular level. Certain plant cells actually have valves in their cells that prevent a chain reaction of freezing to occur in their leaves. A lot of conifers have this, and it's really super fascinating. And so if you're ever wanting to kind of nerd out, us as guides, we're nerding out all the time. If you ever want to nerd out and learn about plants or something a little different, look up plant adaptations in the winter. You'll learn some really cool stuff.
For sure.
Yeah, so... awesome for everyone who guessed correctly and participated. We appreciate you so much. And we're going to start, we're going to do our trivia question for this month. Yeah. And here it is. So how old is Yellowstone National Park? A little bit more of a simple one compared to last month. Give your best guess. I'm sure that some of you guys know. And we do have a bonus question coming up.
So first and foremost, let us know on this one, A, B, C, or D. And then part 2 of this question is, what date is Yellowstone National Park's birthday? If you think really hard, we might be bringing this up for a reason, right? A, March 1st, B, September 15th, C, December 19th, or D, July 5th. So go ahead and give us your best guess for your chance to win this month. Everybody's always joking that I'm always giving things away, but I am going to say that we're bringing it up for a reason, and that's the best I'm going to do in terms of your hint.
Hint.
Hint. But yeah, for sure, we are really grateful to live where we live, regardless of the official age of our local national parks. We are thrilled to see them thriving in the modern era. So that's pretty awesome. Now, okay, guys, it is time for my favorite part of Wildlife Wednesday, which is we're here to answer your questions live. So you may see we have this little iPad here that we're staring down at. That's where we're looking at your questions as you type them. So if you've got a question for Tyler or I or somebody specific, you can feel free to stump either one of us if you want.
Yeah.
Feel free, and we will be happy to address them. I'm going to kind of start all the way at the top here and make sure that I didn't miss any, and we'll kind of make our way down. Wow, folks are joining us from all over the country, which is really, really cool. Let's see here. Don, this is a really good question, and I don't know the answer, which is, how do sandhill crane young get to be called colts? I think you've stumped me. Tyler, do you know?
I'm stumped too. Like, I actually have no idea.
I will do some research, and I will respond to your question in the comment section with the answer, if anyone knows the answer. Sometimes these slang terms for young are developed really early on, and it's not always clear what the etymology of these words are. So, you know, my best guess, if I was just going to throw a wild guess at it, is they are kind of a reddish fawn color when they're born. They do kind of have a soft, fuzzy fur, a little bit like a baby horse does. So that might be why they call them colts, but I'm not at all confident in that.
And I was kind of thinking, you know, behaviorally, they follow their parents around, especially as they grow older. You know, by the time they're about half as tall as their parents to when they're full grown, they have left the nest and they're following their parents through fields and prairies and grasslands. And they might resemble maybe a baby horse following its mother around. So
that makes sense too.
Maybe it's a behavioral thing.
Yeah, but great question. First of all, the fact, Don, A+ for knowing that sandhill young are called colts, because that's not always a very well-known thing. You are absolutely correct. They totally are. And number 2, you got me stumped. That was a really good one. I like that one a lot.
We haven't been stumped in a while.
So that's cool. We'll get you an answer for sure. And Kelsey, you're in the comment section. If you find something earlier than we do, by all means, post it. We'll make you work really hard tonight. But okay, so let's see. Pamela asks, is there a time when older cubs and the new baby cubs are in the den together? When exactly are the older cubs booted out? Pamela, this is a really good question. I'll take this one if you're up for it. Yeah. So I'm assuming we're talking about bears in this case and not other types of young, just based on the cubs there. Both black bears and grizzly bears in the Great Yellowstone ecosystem do keep their young for multiple years. Grizzlies in particular are most commonly going to keep their young for 2 years. Black bears, usually it's 2 years, but there can be some variability from bear to bear and circumstance to circumstance. We've certainly seen bears who've been with their mother for a shorter period of time do go on to survive. It's just a little bit harder for them. The thing about grizzly bears is that they come into estrus, or their breeding season, in the spring, unlike many of our other animals which breed in the fall, or of course our wolves, which breed in the winter, which is why we run our winter wolf programs. Because they're so obsessed with each other, they're less concerned about us. But because bears are breeding in and around May, the most common way that cubs end up separating from their mother to go on and live their adult lives after their second year is that a male bear will smell their mother coming into estrus and kind of chase those cubs away. If that doesn't happen, oftentimes shortly after that, the mother herself will chase the cubs off to go ahead and be adults and start their adult life. So we don't see situations where a mother bear has cubs and then has another set of cubs, because she doesn't come into estrus while she has living cubs, because they're still nursing. So the very attempt of lactation is what's going to go ahead and prohibit estrus from happening in her body, in much the same way that human mothers who are nursing their babies are far, far less likely to become pregnant during that period of time, because their body's going to go ahead and suppress their ability to come back into season, so to speak, so they don't have 2 babies at once. It does occasionally, rarely happen with humans, but we don't have any real cases of it happening with bears. So For instance, our very famous local resident bear, Grizzly Bear 399, has cubs that are going to come out of the den this spring, and they're going to be 2 years old, which means it's time for them to be adult bears and live adult lives. And most likely what will occur is a male bear, perhaps even their own father, will come and see that 399 has come into estrus and heat, and they'll get chased off. That's usually how things go. So you wouldn't have 2 generations of cubs at the same time. Now, that is not to say that adult offspring don't occasionally meet their mom out there.
Yeah.
We've had a couple very famous cases of Grizzly Bear 610, who is the daughter of Grizzly Bear 399, coming in very close contact with her as an adult. I'm trying to think about this now. 610 has got to be 12, 13 years old?
She's older.
Is she older? Is she like 16 now?
Like
that
16,
makes
15?
me feel really old, but that sounds about right.
Yeah.
God, I sound like an old grandmother. I remember when she was a wee young thing. But yeah, so Grizzly Bear 610 now has cubs of her own and has her own life. 399 shows a remarkable tolerance for 610, when typically she doesn't show much tolerance for other female bears that might be in her territory, which is not concrete evidence, but certainly suggestive. She recognizes her own offspring as adults. There was even a case quite a few years ago where she allowed her daughter to feed on a kill that she and her cubs were feeding on, which caused some confusion. And at one point they got all mixed up, and we don't know exactly what happened, but that year 399 had triplets and her daughter 610 had twins. And by the time this interchange, which was not seen by anybody in the human world, was finished, 610 was walking around with triplets and 399 was walking around with twins. And 610 actually ended up adopting her own sister, if you're doing the math there correctly. Ended up raising her sister to adulthood. Which is crazy when you think about it. So we don't see a lot of cub trading. That would be extraordinary. We don't see a lot of mother bears tolerating their offspring around on carcasses. That would be unheard of. But there is one bear on occasion that we can see these sorts of things happening. So great question. I kind of went a little field there, but...
This past summer, a couple of our guides actually saw a male grizzly. I think Jason was there. Chase 399 through Grand Teton National Park. And, he was trying to depredate on those cubs because male bears will try and hunt young cubs in order to bring a female back into estrus.
Yeah, it is an unfortunate reality that in a lot of our carnivore species, I don't know if you've ever heard, for instance, when a male lion takes over a pride, they oftentimes will kill the cubs that are already in the pride. And the idea is that will cause the females who are nursing to come back into heat and come back into estrus to be bred by that male instead of the male who formerly worked with that pride. So it's a little brutal, certainly, but something we do see happen in grizzly bears and certainly polar bears as well. I don't know as much about black bears, but certainly possible. And definitely some other carnivores can have that happen as well. It seems kind of brutal, but if you think about it, evolutionarily, the animal who has the most offspring, who succeed to have the most offspring, sort of wins the evolutionary game. And, a male lion doesn't want to spend all this time raising another male's cubs. So he'd rather be raising his own cubs.
And it seems that the more carnivorous a species is, black bears are really more herbivorous than brown bears or polar bears. The more carnivorous a bear is, the more likely it is to depredate on cubs.
Yeah, for sure. So great question. We kind of got totally on a tangent there, but it's a fascinating subject. Libbe, this is a great question. Tyler, you want to take this or you want me to?
Ooh.
The question is, how did the Teton Planning Commission vote on the bear-proof trash cans and no feeding ordinance? Okay, I will talk about this.
I'm not as familiar with the politics, so I'll let Tenley talk a little bit about it.
He's also been stuck up in Yellowstone for the last couple of weeks and not reading the paper like
exactly.
I have. The short answer is we're not there yet. So they did bring forward an ordinance that raised some questions about the viability of doing certain activities that people are not as concerned about. So, okay, let me back up. For all of you all who don't routinely hang out in Teton County and worry about our politics, one of the things that did happen to us last year is we had some incidences of bears coming very close to town, working near town, and it brought a lot of attention to an issue that has existed in our region for a long time. We live in bear country. It's really important that we have human landscapes that deter wildlife from getting themselves in trouble. One of the greatest causes of mortality in bears is getting into human uses in foods. The concept we have out here is a fed bear is a dead bear. And these bears who get addicted to human garbage end up having to be euthanized for human safety. So by putting out bear-proof trash cans, you're going to keep bears from getting into trouble in the first place. Unfortunately, only part of our local county, Teton County, uses bear-proof trash cans. And as bears have come more and more down into the town of Jackson, there's been a greater groundswell to go ahead and enact ordinances that are going to keep that from happening. We had a very famous case of that same $3.99 bear and her cubs being fed by a woman in a subdivision just right on the boundary of Grand Teton National Park, which almost certainly was part of the cause of some of 399's adult cubs later being euthanized for getting into human use areas as they came back to those locations where they'd received food rewards. The woman claimed in this case that she was feeding moose with a molasses-enriched grain. And moose feeding is legal in the state of Wyoming. Of course, feeding an endangered species like a grizzly bear is not. So the federal government didn't feel like they could press charges. Locally, we didn't have a good ordinance that would keep this woman from doing it again, and we didn't really have a way to really punish anybody who's doing this. We also find that we're seeing an increased number of moose on the Moose Wilson Road that are getting themselves into trouble, being hit by cars, some of these other things, because they are also getting fed. So there's been a lot of attempts to try and create a anti-wildlife feeding ordinance. It would require bear-proof trash cans. It would keep you from feeding things like deer and elk and moose, and that in turn would keep things like predators, mountain lions and the like, from coming into neighborhoods. Wildlife feeding is one of the main reasons that we see things like mountain lions come into neighborhoods, because they're in the very neighborhoods they oftentimes end up getting killed for public safety. Not their fault. They're just following the prey down into the valley floor. So back to the question, where are we on this ordinance that everybody was crying for over the last couple months? Well, they built this ordinance, and then when they read it out loud, they realized it probably would keep people from doing things like putting out bird feeders. Or if you had an apple tree, were you going to be fined because you were feeding bears who decided to come into your yard and eat those apples? It was probably a little bit too strict and had some unintended consequences. So they decided to go back, and the planning committee has done a bunch of research looking at other communities in the Western United States, particularly places like Tahoe and Whistler, who face some of our same problems, to create language that would not punish people for doing things that probably are not causing harm to wildlife, but at the same time protecting our local wildlife from unintentional damage. Now, some of you guys might be going, well, what's so bad about feeding an elk or a deer or a moose, and why do we care? Beyond, of course, bringing predators down who then get into trouble. And the answer is that they are ruminants. They have 4-chambered stomachs, just like a cow does, if you can imagine that. And once you start feeding them rich food in the winter versus sort of the woody twigs and dry stems they're used to, it changes the bacterial formulation of their gut. And it actually kills off the bacteria that they rely on to eat those very tough foods that are the wild foods. And so if you feed a moose for a very short period of time and then you stop feeding that moose, it now doesn't have the bacteria to eat wild foods anymore, and it can starve to death from your efforts. So a lot of people think they're helping animals when they put feed out, things like that molasses-enriched grain. But in fact, they're causing great harm unknowingly. Even something like an apple. I've seen some YouTube and TikTok videos of people like feeding apples to elk or moose. That is really, really not a good idea. They are wild animals. They need wild foods to survive. And more importantly, they need to be able to teach their young those wild habits as well. So
they don't have probiotics to take when they lose all that gut bacteria.
It's really, really awful. One of the most interesting things about our feeding elk on the National Elk Refuge, which is something, of course, that we do, is that once we start feeding elk on the refuge, we can't stop feeding them those alfalfa pellets until we get a grass screen up, because the bacterial gut in their system has changed. So there's a lot of controversy on whether we should have elk feed grounds in the Western United States, whether we should be feeding wildlife or nationally feeding wildlife. Those elk don't have anywhere to go. Their migration route has been blocked. And so for the last 100 years, we have been supplementally feeding them to try to give them a little bit of extra help, because there's just not enough food in such a small space. But once you start,
it's hard to stop. It's complex.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And particularly, even in a winter, they have to continue feeding long after they probably wouldn't have to anymore because the elk are no longer capable of digesting all of the wild foods that they normally need to eat. So it is it's a mess. It's a morass. I am quite pleased that the Planning Commission is taking the time to do this right. People are frustrated that it's taking some time. They feel like some of the impetus of the movement will be lost in the process. But at the end of the day, yeah, there's a way to do this correctly. They're going to get it done. And I'm really excited to receive my own very personal bear trash can.
I am too.
Yeah. I did, however, do some research getting some. And they're sold out all over the country.
There's none in supply. And yeah, we're going to need it this summer.
Yeah. So it's one thing to pass an ordinance. It's another thing to find enough
bear cans for an entire county.
Yeah, that's like 25,000 people that you have to give bear cans to. So it certainly won't be a cheap thing either. But thanks so much for that question. Let's see here. Oh, Libbe, you're so wonderful to talk about our masks in the web store. They are really comfortable. So those are actually made by our owner, Taylor Phillips's family. And what's so cool about them is they were originally made for our guides during the pandemic because we were wearing masks. Well, we still are wearing masks all day long. And so we needed something comfortable that wouldn't just sit on our ears. And so these are sort of the guide masks. And they were so beloved by our guests on tour who just admired them and wanted them that we started selling them in the web store. They are great for all day wear.
They're way more comfortable than having, that band go around your ear and it's like kind of cutting into your skin after, 12 hours in Yellowstone.
Plus they have cute animals on them, right?
And they're stylish, you know, and the fabric's nice.
Definitely.
Exactly.
Ooh, Don, you've got some good ones.
Yeah.
All right.
Ooh, this is a great one.
Yeah.
Okay, so being at the bottom of the food chain, how often do voles, ground squirrels have young, and how many in a typical litter? Yeah. This is a great question. And so, voles and ground squirrels they are both rodents, but they're not closely related. And so their biology is very different and their behavior is different. Squirrels, whether it's tree squirrels, ground squirrels, marmots, prairie dogs, all of those are within the squirrel family, typically only have one litter per year. And it's usually, it varies between species. It can number between 2 to 6 young. And occasionally some species will have a second litter, but for the most part, it's only going to be one litter per year for temperate species. It gets a little more complicated when you get into the tropics like South America, Southeast Asia, which have a huge diversity of squirrel species. Down there, the rules are different. But as far as the United States, it's typically about one litter per year. Sometimes eastern gray squirrels, which I know a lot of people have back home in the East, will have 2 litters per year. Now, it's very different for voles. Voles are active year-round. Ground squirrels hibernate, and so they don't really have the time to reproduce or produce more than 1 litter per year. But voles are active throughout the year, as well as mice and lemmings. We don't have lemmings down here, but they breed up in the Arctic. All of those animals are active in the subnivean zone, deep under that snow layer, which protects them from the elements and those cold temperatures and oftentimes from the predators. And so voles and lemmings, they can breed year round as long as there is a supply of food. Now, their reproduction is going to peak when you do have a high supply of food. And so those summer months for voles are really important. And surprisingly, lemmings actually breed primarily in the winter.
Yeah.
When they are protected and they have great access to, that fall abundance of seeds and nuts out on the tundra. Great question. Voles and squirrels, even though they look different and they are small rodents at the bottom of the food chain, are pretty different animals.
They're super different animals. The entire rodentia family is really, really fascinating when you get into it. I think a lot of people they think of rodentia and rodents as like rats and mice, and then they leave it at that. They're not thinking of beavers,
porcupines,
or capybaras, or all these like really, really cool animals that of course are, they got the buck teeth. They're the rodents, right? So it's an incredibly diverse group on the family tree. There are very few families that are quite as diverse as that. There's a couple that get really crazy out there. Don't even get me started on like panda bears. But
There you go, yeah.
are they bears or are they raccoons?
Are they pandas?
We change our mind every 10 years in the biology.
And there's like 3 different things they could be, and we can't decide.
We can't decide. Yeah, so there are some weird ones out there, don't get me wrong. But Rodentia is definitely one of the craziest families and very, very unappreciated, I think, by the average person. So awesome, great question.
They really, I mean, they're so important for our ecosystems. You know, we do think of them as mice and rats and as a nuisance and a pest, but they are so important for our ecosystems in distributing seeds through the ecosystem, in feeding a variety of other species, in controlling insect pests. No, everyone thinks of rodents as pests, but they themselves control insect pests that can be really damaging to agriculture. So they're an incredibly underrated group of animals.
And kind of fun fact, we have more species of rodent here in terms of different kinds of species than almost any other temperate zone in the world. So more types of weasel, more types of rodents, more types of hawk.
It's pretty cool.
It's pretty cool, definitely.
And what's interesting is we don't often see them.
No.
The only time I really see rodents on tour is like the odd beaver. I've only seen one porcupine on tour, and I've been guiding now for about 1.5 years at Eco Tours. A little over 1.5 years, and I've only seen one porcupine. And then
only been 1.5 years? Yeah, it has.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
Yeah. And occasionally I see voles that are brought to the surface by their predators, by coyotes and foxes. But other than that, I mean, we don't see a whole lot of rodents. We see squirrels, but
I do have a theory about porcupines. I see more porcupines in winter than I do in the summer, and I think it's because they are very, very good at using the tops of trees to feed. So if I spend a lot of time looking up all the time, I think I'd see more porcupine, but because I'm looking out, I don't always catch them. They are this beautiful yellow on those bare trees, though. So winter is definitely the time to see them. All right, so this is a great one. How is the snowfall this season compared to previous seasons? Oh man!
Oh gosh!
By asking, you must know. So we are having the worst winter in terms of snowfall since 1991. The second worst winter on record. That doesn't mean the skiing's bad. It's definitely, the slopes are covered. I was out there on Sunday. There's definitely fun to be had, but it does mean that our snowpack, which of course is our water that we need all summer and fall and what have you, is very low. So if you look at the saturation of water, the amount of water inside the snowpack, which is what we really care about when we're worried about things like drought conditions, it is really, really low. Depending on where you're talking about in Jackson Hole, anywhere between 8 to 18% of average. In the town of Jackson, it's 8% of the water content that we would normally see in the snowpack. So I do have concerns about a really bad forest fire season if we don't get some snow. Now, we are forecast to get some snow this coming weekend, but the temperatures are far so warm right now, we might get rain.
It might not even matter if it's warm enough.
It's been really wonderful and sunny and very uncharacteristic weather. We could use some snowstorms. So if you are friends with Uller or Scotty, the Norse gods of snow, feel free to do some snow god dances for us here in Jackson. We really could use the precipitation, particularly for all those wildlife that definitely rely on that snow melt every spring. So great question.
As far as the effect the snow is going to have on the wildlife, you can think of it in a short-term and a long-term viewpoint. Short-term, the animals are probably going to do better from the lack of snow because they don't have to dig through the snow to get to food. And when I mean better, I mean like the elk and bison don't have to move so much snow to get to the grass. But in the long term, it could mean that this summer, the green up isn't as strong as it usually is. Yeah. And so we'll have to see what happens. Yeah. We could be up for a drought.
Oh, Kelsey's come to the rescue, guys. So Kelsey is one of our other biologists on staff here at EcoTour, and she's in our comment section. And Kelsey did some research. So Dawn, take it from Kelsey. Based on her research, sandhill crane young are called colts because of their long, strong legs. That makes so much sense.
That's so cute. Oh my gosh.
Adorable.
And they are so awkward. They're like these little balls with a long neck and then super long stilt-like legs. Cute. And they have no tail or wings. So they are literally like this little cotton ball on these stilts. It's adorable.
Worth a Google. It's really cute. Thank you, Kelsey. We appreciate you doing that. That's awesome. Let's see. Oh, Libbe, you also, I think, got the same source as Kelsey.
Yeah.
Excellent. Perfect. From the Booker Creek Preserve in Environmental Education. That's awesome. Thank you guys very much for your help on that. Let's see here. Susan, great question. Do female bears enter menopause or stop going into estrus? No. No, they don't. So menopause is a uniquely human mammalian trait. Almost no other animals go into any kind of menopausal state. And there's a lot of theories from an anthropology perspective why that would be. But almost every other mammal, if there is going to be fewer offspring born at the end of a female's life, it's more because males become less fertile over time, not because females are unable to go into estrus. So the theory as to why that is, why are humans unique in this menopause state, is because human young take an extraordinarily long time to bring to a point where they can take care of themselves. So from a biological perspective, adulthood means that you can hunt and feed yourself. Depending on who you want to ask from an anthropology perspective, that can be anywhere from 8 to 13 years of age. Yeah. Raising young for 8 years, it seems like a long time to raise a bear for 2 years, much less raising young for 13 years, right? Because 8 years, that sounds great, but I'm sorry, anthropology folks, I don't think they're going to be able to hunt and feed themselves at 8. As the daughter, as the mother of a 2-year-old.
Oh gosh.
She's definitely not going to be able to hunt and feed herself. So the other issue at heart here is when humans went from moving around on all fours to walking upright, we faced a really big problem because as our heads continued to grow in size, as our brains became larger, it became harder and harder for human babies to fit through our birth canals. And as we went upright, women's pelvises adjusted to come forward so that they had an upright stance. And after a while, they couldn't get any more upright and have babies of a certain head size be born. So basically we kind of compromised. Our heads had stopped growing. Can you imagine what would have happened if we even smarter than we are today, if they'd gotten any bigger? But babies had stopped growing and women's pelvises stopped narrowing, and we kind of reached sort of a equilibrium. That has worked, but it does mean we have the highest rate of mother and infant mortality in the mammal world, which is to say human pregnancy is far more risky than, say, bear pregnancy, right? Bears give birth during hibernation, and they give birth to young that are about the size of a quarter. And if you know how big a grizzly bear is, that's not probably a real risky pregnancy compared to humans, which are giving birth to pretty large young in terms of size ratios. Primates don't have this difficulty because, of course, they're moving around on all fours, and so their pelvises are more open despite the large head sizes of their babies. So we actually have 3 things that are going on. First of all, babies are probably born a trimester earlier than they should be in a true evolutionary sense. Our babies are born much younger and earlier and less developed than other mammals are, so they fit through the birth canal. Wow. So they call it a 4th trimester. But the second thing that happens is because pregnancy is so risky, if you already have a baby, the odds of you dying in childbirth, think, Neanderthal, Stone Age peoples, not modern day with medicine, the odds of you dying in childbirth are quite high and quite risky. So the idea is menopause evolutionarily came about as a way to keep people, to basically keep women from continuing to have children after a certain point, so that the existing children that had already been born had a higher survivability rate. Because remember, evolutionarily, the people who have the most offspring win the game, right? So by making women unable to continue to bear children, the survivability of the existing children was higher. Mm-hmm. That's just a theory. We don't really know. There's not really a good way to find out, but it does seem to make sense based on the evidence at hand.
And that makes a lot of sense to me. So typically, animals that reproduce more have higher fitness, and so their progeny is, goes off into the world. Typically, there's 2 strategies that animals have. They can either have a lot of offspring and they invest very little in those offspring, or they can have one offspring that they invest a lot of time and energy into. And because childbirth is so risky for humans, it makes sense that humans give birth very few times in their life, and they spend a huge amount of energy and time dedicated to those very few offspring. That's going to be most efficient time-wise and energy-wise, and less risky than reproducing as much as you can.
Yeah. So think of it as like the elephant strategy versus the
vole.
honeybee or vole
Vole
strategy, right? It's interesting. The higher you go up on the food chain, and the more complex the life, the more time and effort they dedicate towards their young. I had a professor in college who called them reproductive successes versus reproductive failures. If you think about it a little bit, you know, an animal like a vole is going to be far more effective at reproducing. Those young may not have the same survival rate, but they're going to reproduce far more effectively than a horse or an elk. And a horse or an elk is going to be far more effective at reproducing than a grizzly, who has a 50% mortality of their cubs and takes 2 years to raise them. The result of which is animals who can bear offspring quite easily tend to be able to recover from population loss far more effectively than animals who are slow reproductive failures. The idea evolutionarily was perhaps that animals at the top of the food chain wouldn't want to reproduce too quickly, or they'd very quickly kind of outpace all of their food resources. So all of the what we call charismatic megafauna all over the world, all the big exciting fuzzy things, tend to be reproductive failures. And of course, if they're not good at replacing themselves, it also means they all tend to be endangered species as a result. So if you think about it, lions and tigers and bears, oh my, all tend to be these kind of quote unquote reproductive failures, so they don't become too numerous. But they also, as a result of that, put a lot of effort into each young. So great question. Really, really fascinating stuff. If you get me started, I'll go on forever on this
And there
stuff.
is one mammal that I know that also goes through menopause.
Oh, yeah.
It's the orca.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so
That's
orcas go through menopause, and we think it's a cultural thing.
Yeah.
And so female orcas can live to 60, 80 years old, and they stop giving birth at around 40 years of age. And then they become kind of the matriarch, the grandmother of the family. And orcas, they have traditions. Each orca population around the globe has its own prey species, its own culture, and its own methods of hunting that prey species. And that knowledge is typically passed from grandmother to daughter to granddaughter. So
I forgot about orcas.
Yeah,
Gosh.
yeah.
That's really cool. That's awesome.
You know, orcas are hunting occasionally whales. They're hunting really fast prey like dolphins. They're hunting other dangerous prey like stingrays. They really need that knowledge. And that knowledge typically comes from the grandparents, which is really cool.
So speaking of orcas, Don just asked me what happened to my cat.
Oh, yeah.
For you guys that are new to Wildlife Wednesday, my cat likes to make an occasional guest appearance because we are in my house right now. Orca, the cat, because she's black and white, loves water and killing things, so her name's Orca, is doing just fine. I think she decided that this got boring, so she's much more interested in taking a nap at the moment than she is coming and meowing at us while we're doing the broadcast.
For a while, I thought she was afraid of me, and then she finally made an appearance after a Wildlife Wednesday episode, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's Orca, I've never seen her before. But that was
maybe Tyler was
8
keeping her
months
away.
after we had started doing this.
Anyway, she's doing just fine. She's getting quite fat, so she might need a diet. But other than that, she's doing really well. Since we were talking about orcas. Oh, Saddie said, I was about to ask about the cat too, so there you guys go. The cat is alive and well. All is well. We're working really hard on teaching the 2-year-old to pet the cat nicely, which, you know, some success. Anybody has any suggestions for me, I'd be open to hearing it.
Orca's really good at hiding. Like, when you don't see her, or she doesn't want you to see her, you don't see her.
Oh my gosh!
Oh my gosh!
Another question on Orca. Oh, I'm so glad you guys love Orca. I'll have to grab her on one of these episodes, and you guys can all say hi for sure. That's fantastic. Oh my. Mark asks, have you heard of another installment of Yellowstone Live being shot this year? Mark, I do know that was a very successful program, and the plan was to continue doing it, and then the pandemic kind of put a halt on it. For those of you guys who are long-term Wildlife Wednesday listeners, I have a pet peeve with Yellowstone Live, y'all. I do. Like, half of it is shot in Grand Teton. I'm dead serious. Which is fine. It's called Yellowstone Live. And I realized that Yellowstone and Grand Teton Live probably is a little bit long. Doesn't have the same zing to it.
They're both in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem.
Yeah, I think he thinks I'm being silly. But I like precision. It's Yellowstone and Grand Teton Live. But no, in all seriousness, I had heard that it was very successful, that it was well worth the money and effort that had been invested in it, and that the hope was to do it again. But that was like 2020. I had not heard anything since, and it just may be that, you know, the vagaries of the pandemic were kind of keeping it off the table for now. But, you know, as we seem to be doing a little bit better as a country, maybe that's something they're thinking about. You know, I do know that there has been a lot more filming going on, nature documentaries and some other things. We've been involved in some of those, which has been really exciting. That more and more people are out there filming for these projects for broadcast television. So I think as these things become more and more available and as an option, we'll hear more on Yellowstone Live. And we'll update you guys as we know. But I don't know of any plans at the moment.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah,
because
super fun.
I would love to see it. I've saw the first one.
Yeah.
It'd be great.
Super fun.
Yeah.
Super fun.
It'd be fun to be a part of it.
I know.
That'd be a lot of fun.
We should be in Yellowstone Live. Wouldn't that be fun, guys? That'd be super fun. I'll just sit by a beaver dam and be like, there's a beaver.
There's a
beaver.
moose.
There's a moose.
Exactly.
That'd be super fun. Well, guys, okay, I think we got all the questions this month. Yay! We actually got them all. All right, that's fantastic. Thank you guys so much for joining us. This was so much fun. It's always a pleasure spending the first Wednesday of each month with you all. Remember, it's 5:30 p.m. Mountain Time. Right on our Facebook Live page. We do rebroadcast it on Instagram the next day. And you can always catch back episodes on our Facebook page or on YouTube. Thank you guys so much for joining us.
We love nerding out with you guys, if you can't tell.
Yeah.
We go on tangents and
we're already super excited for next month's episode. Lots of really fun things to show you for sure. But in the meantime, I hope you all have a wild month. You stay safe out there and we'll see you soon.
Awesome.
So long.